You are listening to Reformed Thinking.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're here today for a focused look at a topic that, well, it really touches everyone in some way, marriage. We're going to dig into some really insightful source material that challenges common attitudes and sheds light on what marriage is actually meant to be.
That's right.
Our mission today is to uncover the foundational essence of marriage, its divine blueprint, you could say, and what it reflects about something, well, much bigger. Get ready for perspectives that might just give you a fresh view on this ancient institution.
Indeed. And we'll be drawing from specific excerpts that speak to the biblical understanding of marriage. Our aim is to really distill the core knowledge and insights from these texts, helping you grasp not just what is stated, but why it carries such weight. What stands out in these sources is a conviction about marriage that maybe many don't fully consider today. We'll look at its creation, its purpose, and the pretty challenging teachings around it.
Today, we're diving into material from a source titled All That Jesus Commanded by John Piper. Specifically, the section, What God Has Joined Together, Let No Man Separate, for marriage mirrors God's covenant with us, plus some additional notes for clarity. We'll be trying to grasp marriage through a particular lens, one that sees it as God's own creation, a picture of God's covenant with his people, and ultimately a display of his glory. So let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's begin at the very start. Our sources place the foundation of marriage not in, human convention or social ideas, but squarely in God's creative act. How do these texts present marriage as fundamentally God's doing, his own work?
Well, what's really compelling here is how Jesus, when he's asked about marriage, he points straight back to creation. He quotes Genesis 2:24, stating that the Creator made them male and female, and then said, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh."
Right, back to the beginning.
Exactly. And this is significant. The sources highlight that this isn't just Moses writing down history or law. Jesus makes it very clear that God himself spoke these words.
Ah, okay.
That direct attribution to God really underscores his direct authorship, his involvement in marriage right from the start. It means marriage isn't just a human agreement that, societies cook up over time.
Or something that just evolves culturally.
Precisely. It's presented as a divine establishment, designed and set in place by God at the dawn of human history. So when we talk about marriage, we're talking about something God started and continues to oversee.
That one flesh idea always stands out to me. It sounds like so much more than just two people deciding to live together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does our material tell us about this unique reality God creates? It feels like it's hinting at something beyond just a legal thing.
That's right. And this concept, one flesh, it describes a new reality that, well, it goes beyond ordinary human understanding. It speaks of a spiritual and physical unity that isn't solely based on human choice or just an agreement. The sources really stress that these two become one flesh by God's work, not just by their choice. Think about what that suggests. When man and woman marry, it's not just a declaration they make to each other or, to the community.
Something else happens.
Yes, something divine occurs. God actively participates in creating this singular reality. It's a union initiated and established by God himself, leading to a deep, inseparable bond that goes way beyond just companionship or mutual consent.
So it's like they become a single entity in God's eyes.
In a way, yes. This unity is a creation of God's own hands, establishing a state that humans are told not to dissolve because he did it. It's a spiritual joining first, which makes the physical union a natural expression. And it's a spiritual unity, initiated by God, that holds the physical bond together, making it a sacred relationship.
So, okay, if God created the first marriage in Eden, does that mean God is personally involved in, every marriage that happens now? How does the material support that idea? It seems like a big claim.
It is a big claim, but yes, that's precisely the point Jesus makes. He's clear that marriage is God's creation, and he doesn't limit this creative act just to Adam and Eve. He speaks to the marriages of his day, and by extension to every marriage, when he states, "What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate."
What God has joined, present tense almost.
Right. It indicates that God is the decisive creator of each specific marriage union. It isn't just a general concept for humanity to follow. The phrase, "let not man separate," speaks directly to the particular marriage a person is in. It means God has actively joined that specific husband and wife.
Wow.
Yeah, and this perspective lifts marriage way beyond what most people think of it as. It's presented not just as a human agreement or a social contract or a legal status. Instead, it's a great work of God, a sacred covenant established and held together by his own will and action.
So every marriage really has God's fingerprints on it, in a sense.
That's what the source suggests. And for a couple, understanding that could reshape their whole view of their relationship. It's not just us two, but us two joined by God. It places a divine significance on the vows.
Hmm. This leads us into a really grand idea in these sources, that marriage isn't just for us, for personal happiness or having kids, but it's meant to reflect something about God himself. How does marriage mirror God's covenant with his people?
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger biblical picture, Jesus, knowing the Jewish scriptures inside out, understood that God himself portrayed his relationship with his chosen people, Israel, as a marriage.
Not just a metaphor, then.
It seems to be presented as more than just a simple metaphor to illustrate a point. It's treated as a foundational understanding woven throughout the ancient texts that shaped their worldview, and ours too, if we take this seriously.
Yep.
Think about these examples from the Old Testament, which really set the stage for how marriage is understood here.
Hmm.
Isaiah 54:5 says, "Your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name." That's pretty direct.
Yeah, very direct.
Then in Hosea chapter 2, God explicitly says, "You will call me my husband, and I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness." It describes this permanent, initiated by God bond.
Like a marriage vow from God.
Exactly. And Ezekiel 16:8 adds more detail, speaking of God making a vow and entering into a covenant with Israel, saying, "You became mine." And then, to show how serious this bond is, Jeremiah 3:20 likens Israel's unfaithfulness to a treacherous wife leaving her husband. So these ancient pictures, God as the husband, Israel as his wife, they form the essential backdrop for understanding marriage's purpose and the divine plan. They root human marriage in the very character of God.
That's a really strong connection. So our human marriages are meant to be analogies, designed to reflect God's own union with his chosen people. That definitely raises the stakes for how we view marriage.
It absolutely does. The one flesh union, which is so key to human marriage, is described in the material as a covenant analogous with God's covenant with Israel. Now, this doesn't mean it's just a loose similarity. It suggests the deep unity, both physical and spiritual, in human marriage is designed to reflect the spiritual union and the faithful relationship between God and his people.
So it's meant to show something about God.
Yes, this divine design is intended to display God's invincible and gracious faithfulness to his covenant people, his wife. The sources repeatedly make this point, saying God never divorced his wife and married another and always took her back, even after separations and, great pain.
Like the story of Hosea and Gomer you mentioned.
Precisely. Hosea's life wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a living parable, a visible lesson of God's radical, pursuing love for his wayward spouse, Israel. God has shown his never truly abandoning his wife, always seeking her restoration, even when he had to discipline her for spiritual adultery.
So our marriages are meant to be a living picture of that kind of divine steadfastness.
That's the idea. They're not just about personal fulfillment, but about bearing witness to God's character. They are intended to be visible signs of his loyalty.
And ultimately, this all ties back to God's glory, right? How does marriage become a way God is made known and honored?
Yes, ultimately, the source frames marriage as the work of God's creation, the portrayal of his covenant love, and the display of his glory. Just like God chose Israel to be a people, a name, a praise, and a glory, quoting Jeremiah 13:11, human marriage is meant to glorify God by reflecting his faithfulness.
How did that work practically?
Well, through the very existence and hopefully the stable endurance of marriages, God fills the earth with mostly unwitting witnesses to the relationship between him and his covenant people. So when a husband and wife facing difficulties show patience, forgiveness, perseverance, they are, in a way, echoing God's own dealings with us. When they stay united, seeking reconciliation instead of just escaping, they demonstrate a loyalty that points beyond themselves. The harmony, the sacrificial love, the covenant keeping within a marriage, when lived out according to this divine blueprint, serve as a tangible, living illustration of God's own character.
So it points to his steadfastness, his loyal love.
His restorative grace for his covenant people, yes. Marriage, therefore, isn't just a private arrangement. It's intended as a cosmic picture put on display for everyone to see, showing a facet of God's character to the world. A visible sermon, almost, without needing words.
Given this really high view of marriage, it makes Jesus' teaching on divorce seem all the more, striking. Our sources describe the Pharisees coming to him about divorce in Matthew 19. What was their question, and how did Jesus respond initially, given this understanding of marriage's origins?
Right, the Pharisees came to Jesus with a very direct question, maybe even a loaded one it seems, trying to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?"
For any cause? That sounds broad.
It was. And it wasn't just an academic question. It was likely aimed at trapping Jesus in a legal debate, because there were different interpretations of the Mosaic law on divorce at the time, some more lenient, some stricter. They wanted to see which side he'd take.
Okay.
But Jesus didn't immediately jump into the legal debate or refer to Moses. Instead, he bypassed their framing entirely and took them straight back to creation, to the very beginning. He reasserted God's original design, saying, "What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate."
So he changed the terms of the debate.
He did. His response clearly set a different standard than they were expecting, rooting marriage firmly in its original divine design, a standard that existed before any concessions were made because of human sin. He shifted the conversation from human custom and legal points to God's foundational intent.
But the Pharisees pushed back, didn't they? They brought up Moses. They asked, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? How did Jesus handle that apparent contradiction, God's design versus Moses' provision?
Yeah, that's a natural question they posed, directly challenging his appeal to creation. They saw a tension, maybe even a conflict, with the Mosaic law that did permit divorce. Jesus clarified that Moses didn't command divorce. Rather, he allowed divorce because of your hardness of heart. But from the beginning, it was not so.
Ah, allowed, not commanded. That's a key difference.
It's crucial. Jesus highlights this distinction. Moses' provision for a certificate of divorce wasn't a command from God reflecting his ideal for marriage. It was a concession, a practical allowance made because of human sinfulness, specifically their hardness of heart.
What does hardness of heart mean there? Just stubbornness.
It generally describes a stubborn refusal to live by God's higher standard, a resistance to divine will. The Mosaic allowance was, in a sense, a way to manage marriage in light of the fallen human condition, maybe to mitigate some worse outcomes, like a husband just abandoning his wife without anything formal.
Yeah.
It wasn't a statement of God's original unbreakable design.
So Jesus put Moses' rule in context.
Yes. He basically said it was a response to human failure and brokenness, not God's perfect will from the start. He revealed that what they thought of as a command was actually God managing sin, showing forbearance.
So Jesus was essentially saying, look, that's how it was handled then because of human failing. But now, with me and the kingdom I'm bringing, things are different. What did that mean for his followers? What was this higher standard he was setting?
Exactly. He implied that he had come to do something about that hardness of heart. His presence, the establishment of God's kingdom, meant the standard for his followers would be higher than what Moses merely allowed. He was reasserting the original design for marriage in this new era, a standard made possible perhaps by the redemptive work he was starting.
And what was that standard specifically?
He declared in Matthew 19:9, "Whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." Now, it's important to note, as the source material acknowledges, there's no consensus on the full interpretation of that exception clause, the except for sexual immorality part, among Christ's followers today.
Right, that's a point of much discussion.
It is. Some interpret sexual immorality, the Greek word porneia, quite broadly to include various serious sexual sins. Others see it more narrowly, maybe referring to something like premarital unfaithfulness discovered only after marriage, or specifically adultery itself, arguing it breaks the one-flesh bond in a unique way.
And others might say it allows separation, but not remarriage.
That's another view, yes, that while the sin might necessitate separation, the marriage bond itself isn't dissolved in God's eyes while both spouses live, thus precluding remarriage. The author of our source, John Piper, holds this latter view, believing Jesus considered the marriage covenant breakable only by death and therefore forbade remarriage while the spouse is living.
So for Piper, Jesus is calling people back to the original "till death do us part" standard.
That's his interpretation presented in the source. He sees porneia as something that grievously wounds the marriage, but doesn't nullify the covenant in a way that permits remarriage. For Piper, this reassertion means the original design of marriage breakable only by death is to be rediscovered and upheld in the kingdom Jesus brings. It's a very high bar, a difficult teaching, but presented as part of the radical call of discipleship.
This firm stance on divorce really makes us consider its actual consequences. Our sources talk a lot about the serious reasons why divorce is viewed so gravely. What's presented as one of the main theological reasons for its seriousness.
One of the primary theological reasons given is that divorce and remarriage tell a lie about God's relationship to his people. As we've discussed, marriage is designed, according to this view, to portray God's invincible and gracious faithfulness to his covenant people.
The mirror analogy again.
Right. The idea is that God never divorced his wife and married another and always took her back, even after terrible unfaithfulness and periods of separation, as seen throughout the Old Testament story with Israel. This pattern shows God's loyal, persistent love.
So when a human marriage breaks,
When a human marriage breaks, especially through divorce and then remarriage while the first spouse is alive, it's seen as misrepresenting this core aspect of God's character and his faithfulness in covenant. It sends a message that contradicts God's own actions in nature.
like actors messing up the play's message.
That's a good way to put it. When a marriage, intended as this living parable of God's covenant, dissolves, it distorts the message. It's viewed as a direct contradiction to the very purpose for which marriage was created, to be a visible witness to God's unbreakable covenant love. It's seen as tearing the fabric of a divine illustration.
Beyond the theological side, the sources also describe the practical and emotional devastation divorce often brings. Can you paint a picture of that impact, the suffering involved?
Yes, the sources paint a very stark picture of the pain. Divorce is portrayed as deeply wrenching, sometimes described as often more emotionally wrenching than the death of a spouse.
More than death. Why?
Well, death, though final and terribly sad, often brings a sense of closure, and there's usually a community outpouring of grief and support. Divorce, however, can feel like a deep betrayal, a shattering of trust, and a violent uprooting of one's identity and future. It isn't usually a quick event either.
Right.
The sources mention it involves long years in coming and long years in the settlement and in the adjustment, leading to immeasurable upheaval of life. For individuals, there can be this crushing sense of failure, guilt, and a fear that can really torture the soul. Tears night after night, like the psalmist described.
Intense loneliness, too, I imagine.
Overwhelming loneliness, yes. A sudden void where a partner used to be. And this pervasive sense of a future, just devastated, dreams gone, plans ruined. Daily life gets hit hard, too. Work performance can suffer because of the mental distress. Social interactions become awkward or painful, as friends might take sides or just not know what to say.
And the legal side often adds to it.
Definitely. The misery is often compounded by courtroom battles, legal wrangling that can drag on, drain finances, and deplete emotional reserves, turning private sorrow into a kind of public conflict. It's a dismantling of a shared life, often piece by painful piece.
And the impact isn't just on the couple, is it? The sources really highlight the agonizing place of children in all this.
Absolutely. The impact on children is described as agonizing, and it's often the most heartbreaking part. Children get caught in the middle of their parents' broken covenant. They often feel torn loyalties, maybe abandonment, sometimes even a misplaced guilt, thinking they caused it.
That's tragic.
It is. Parents hope the scars won't cripple their children or damage their own future ability to form healthy marriages. But the psychological and relational wounds can be very deep. Tensions over custody, finances these, often deepen the wounds, turning care into conflict.
And visitations can stretch it out for years.
Yes. The sources mention awkward, sometimes artificial visitation setups can lengthen the tragedy over decades, extending the effects far into the future, potentially impacting multiple generations. A child growing up with that fallout might carry it into their own relationships, maybe viewing marriage with cynicism or fear, struggling with trust. It shows the wide ripple effect.
So it's clearly not just personal pain, but it ripples out into a broader societal issue as well. How do the sources connect the individual experience of divorce to the health of the community or the church?
That's a vital connection the sources make. They issue a strong warning that compassionate compromises on the sanctity of marriage that weaken the solidity of the covenant of marriage look loving in the short run but wreak havoc over decades. This applies to individuals, the church, and society.
So lowering the standards, even with good intentions.
Even with the best intentions, perhaps to ease immediate pain or accommodate hard situations, the long-term consequences are seen as profoundly harmful. Think of it like a foundation pillar in a building. If you chip away at it to make things seem easier right now, you might feel helpful initially, but over time the whole structure is compromised. The sources argue that this firm teaching, though it might be tough to hear, is actually presented as a form of genuine caring. The reasoning is that a sinful decision, even if made under duress, is considered just as damaging to a person's soul and long-term flourishing as the emotional pain they feel.
So upholding the standard is the loving thing in this view.
Yes, upholding a higher standard for marriage is seen as an act of love, not rigid rule following for its own sake, but a protective measure designed to safeguard individuals, families, and communities from the devastating fallout of broken covenants. It aims to promote long-term well-being and reflect God's own steadfastness. It's about building for stability across generations.
Okay, so in light of both the immense pain involved in divorce and Jesus' firm commands, the material presents a real challenge for Christ followers. How to love biblically in these situations. How do the sources suggest we approach this? It sounds incredibly difficult.
It is difficult. The challenge presented is exactly that, to mingle the tears of compassion with the tough love of obedience. That phrase captures the tension well. Jesus himself was extraordinarily caring, showing great tenderness to hurting people. Yet his teaching on divorce was undeniably firm. What? God has joined together, let not man separate.
So compassion and firmness together.
Yes, it suggests that a firm and loving confrontation with Christ's commands, even when they're difficult or unpopular, is presented as a form of real caring. It's not about being cold or judgmental. The reasoning is that a sinful choice, even made in distress, can be just as harmful to a person's soul and future as the emotional pain they're already in.
So true care might involve calling someone to a harder path.
That's the idea presented. Holding to divine truth while still having deep empathy for the suffering involved. Seeing the true care sometimes means guiding someone toward a higher, perhaps more difficult standard for their ultimate good and flourishing and for faithfulness to God. It's trying to reflect God's own character. He is both righteous and merciful.
It sounds like there's a clear distinction being made between genuine care and a kind of compromise that looks loving, but according to this view, isn't helpful long term. People often think being loving just means being lenient.
Exactly. And people sometimes confuse loving care with compromise. They might think the tenderness of Jesus and the toughness of his commands can't both be expressions of love in the same difficult situation. But the sources argue strongly against that view.
How so?
They state plainly that compassionate compromises on the sanctity of marriage that weaken the solidity of the covenant of marriage look loving in the short run, but wreak havoc over decades. This suggests that softening the standards, while appearing kind and understanding right now, maybe to ease someone's immediate pain or social difficulty, actually has severe negative consequences down the road.
What kind of consequences?
Consider the ripple effect again. If society or the church consistently lowers the bar for what makes a marriage binding, then future generations inherit a weakened institution. Kids grow up seeing promises as less binding, unions as more easily dissolved. This can contribute to family instability, emotional insecurity, and an erosion of trust in communities.
So what seems kind now might cause more harm later.
That's the argument. What looks like kindness in one instance can, over time, help create a societal environment that's far less stable and nurturing for everyone. So it's a call to discern between true, long-sighted care, which aims for ultimate well-being and faithfulness, and short-sighted accommodation, which might ease immediate discomfort, but potentially invites greater distress later on.
So what's the flip side then? What's the ultimate benefit of upholding these high standards for marriage, even when it feels really tough or maybe goes against the grain culturally? What's the long-term payoff?
The ultimate benefit described is quite significant. Preserving the solid framework of the marriage covenant with these high standards, even though it feels hard or unpopular in the moment, ultimately produces 10,000 blessings the future generations take for granted.
10,000 blessings. That's quite a claim.
It is. It highlights a perspective that stretches far beyond the immediate pain or difficulty of one generation. It suggests that sticking to God's original blueprint for marriage creates a stable, healthy environment that benefits generations to come, maybe in ways we don't even fully see right now.
What might those blessings look like?
Well, they could manifest as more stable families, providing secure environments for children to grow up in. They might lead to greater social cohesion, more mutual support in communities. When marriages are viewed as serious, lasting covenants, it tends to foster a culture of perseverance, forgiveness, self-sacrifice virtues that strengthen not just families, but society as a whole.
It shapes the whole culture around relationships.
It does. It can create a clearer moral compass for people navigating relationships. The sources suggest that this adherence honors Christ, fosters the spiritual health of marriage itself, and strengthens the church Jesus established. It's about building a solid foundation for lasting good, contributing to human flourishing, and perhaps most importantly in this view, giving a clear living witness to the loyal character of God himself.
Wow, what a thought-provoking deep dive into the essence of marriage. It's really something to consider how closely our human relationships are tied to God's character and his purposes.
It truly does shine a light on how marriage, in this perspective, is seen as much more than just a social contract or personal choice. It's viewed as a divine act, a sacred covenant designed to picture God's faithfulness and display his glory to the world.
Indeed. So for you, our listener, here's maybe a final thought to carry with you. If marriage is meant to illustrate God's steadfast and gracious faithfulness to his people, how might your understanding of marriage, whether you happen to be married or single, influence the way you view all of God's covenant dealings with humanity, particularly his covenant of grace in the gospel?
That's a good question to ponder. We trust this deep dive has given you much to think about.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep seeking to understand.